The topic I presented and proposed, and the one I'll probably do in Sicily at the Tucson Sicily conference early in June, is about teaching consciousness studies. And when I cooked this up, I thought, oh, this will be rich. It'll take up the whole time and so on. And then when I got into it, I said, geez, 5 minutes worth. How much do I need? So I'm going to talk about a little bit. I've sort of divided the topic. Let me get back to where I was. One of the things I want to say just to start with is teaching consciousness studies is a real winner these days. That is, so many people are interested in it. And students in particular, young folks, really are deeply interested in questions about the nature of consciousness and various aspects of it. This is from a piece from an article I wrote some time back, but and there's a lot more to it than this, but it just points out how many dimensions there are to the topic of consciousness studies. These are, and I don't even have a little box for Asian philosophy, which in some ways should be bigger than everything else put together. A lot of the Greek philosophy, German idealism, phenomenology, and so on, they're all about consciousness. And then you got Freud, Jung, the deep mind, all of those different areas. And then we've already heard from Ben Goertzel, computationalism is becoming a big part. And are those poor computers, has been told me once, conscious and sort of enslaved and unhappy, or are they just like fancy toasters? What's the story about those? And needless to say, neuroscience is a big part of it. The Tucson conferences over the years, and I think still today, are 80% neuroscience, with consciousness as sort of cream on the cake. And then there's the second organization, the Scientific Association for the Scientific Study of Consciousness, that won't put up with any nonsense at all about quantum theory or anything else. I don't know quite where they are right now. They got started in 1994 when the first Tucson conferences were presented, and the stories are they created their own society so they didn't have to listen to that nonsense about quantum theory and so on, or as Pat, what's her name, called it, fairy dust. Anyway, big area. British empiricism has been very influential on consciousness studies today, continues to be, especially through analytic philosophy. This is an area that really was started by Bertrand Russell and Whitehead, more by Bertrand Russell. Although I love Whitehead's comment that the world's made up of two kinds of people, the simple-minded and the muddle-headed. And he said, yeah. And which one are you? Referring to Bertie. Anyway, American pragmatism, William James, of course, and John Dewey, who I'll have a few things to say about as we go along. Developmental studies, and this is just the core. There's more and more interest in shamanism nowadays. There's a whole area of animal, non-human consciousness. Even nowadays, there's a lot more interest in the possibility of alien consciousness. So in terms of teaching, especially for graduate students or more mature undergraduates, there's so much stuff. It's an automatic winner because people have so many things they're interested in, and this allows them to, if you set up your course so that they can explore a little bit, this is a natural realm to work in. I mentioned this very briefly yesterday when we were waiting for Deepak not to show up yesterday, but the growth of the topic is probably visible from the societies. Our own society started over 10 years ago and now has somewhere in the neighborhood of 250 members. The Society for Consciousness Studies That's Jeffrey Martin's URL. He's great on, he'll cook up a short URL for you that'll be perfect. CUNSC.org. I mean, how better can you do than that? And then, of course, we have our conferences. This is one of them. So we're cooking with gas finally now. And then in the summer, the Tucson conference won't be in Tucson. It'll be in Sicily. It goes back and forth, as most of you know. One year it's abroad, another year it's in Tucson. So, for example, a few years ago it was in Hong Kong, and our friend here, I'm trying to think, I'm so bad, I'm so dyslexic. Where'd he go? Gino, yeah, Gino ran the whole thing pretty much at that time. So it's a burgeoning field, and the interest in the topic is burgeoning. And this will be a big conference. Usually there's over 1,000 people comes to this thing. I'll be there. Several of my students will be there. My wife will be there. Friends will be there. Okay, let's move on. Having a little trouble with my machine, but I'll get it worked out. Okay, here we go. This is a list of conferences from a website that just collects conferences, and these all have the word consciousness in them. So December 2002, there's 5. Then we get to January. I'm not even going to start to count. These are all real conferences coming up in the next year or two, mostly the next year. And the Tucson conference isn't even on this list. So in the last 10 years, we've gone from consciousness being a dirty word in academia to what you're looking at here. Just pick the city you want to travel to this summer. And if you got travel money, there are a few conferences for you to check out. It's really interesting to look and see where the real interest is, by the way. Most of these have to do with machine conferences, computational work, cognitive science, but there are quite a few on emotion and artificial intelligence, the hard problem. Well, there's a lot of stuff. Ethology and animal consciousness, although certainly the number of these that are what you would call real philosophical consciousnesses, conferences are in the minority. Here's one right here, consciousness and self-consciousness. That's in Malaysia, so you can get around. When I started looking at conferences for this summer, I pretty much said, well, where do I want to go? Look at this page. All right, let's see if I can get back. So there's no shortage of interest. And if you teach advanced undergraduates or graduate students anywhere, you'll find that very quickly. Folks have a lot of things they're interested in. And if you offer a course, it gives them a chance to explore some of these things. You'll have a full class. And if you honor the students and give them some reins to do what they like, you'll have a happy full course. And in fact, I probably shouldn't say it, but I've gotten evaluations that are so high, they just didn't have any room to put any criticism. One student said, well, what can he do to improve himself? And the student wrote, don't retire. But it's not that I'm a great teacher. I mean, I've won awards. At the first course I offered way back in the 70s on consciousness, won me a national award, as a matter of fact, in a free trip to Chicago in the liberal studies program organization. But it's not that I didn't do anything special. If you just create a situation where students can explore their own interests, well, I'll talk more about that because I'm a humanist and Rogerian by training and by interest, and so that's my method, if you want to call it that. This is our own society before it was our society. Google group. It actually started out with about 12 friends. In fact, my dear friend Eugene Taylor, no longer with us, said, "Allan, what the hell is it? Just looks like a group of your friends." And I said, "Yeah, that's about it." We had to give up Google Groups for a couple of reasons. So you recognize a number of these. There's emotes, for example. Here I am twice because it gives me a better way to manage the group. Bernie is on here. I don't know how he got on here twice, but anyway, that's where we started a little over 10 years ago. And now we're up to over 250 members. So, and we're a small organization, as I think Moots or Jeffrey pointed out yesterday somewhere. Our real motivation was a conference where we wouldn't be treated as given the bums rush because we talked about weird and wonderful things. And early on, it was all Daniel Dennett and Pat. You may remember her name. She was the key reductionist along with Daniel Dennett. Actually, I'd love to hear Daniel talk. I went to a lecture, one of the Tucson meetings a couple of years ago, and I like the man. I told my wife afterwards, I said, he did everything but make it disappear, being a dedicated materialist. So the big conferences started, and this is the Association for Scientific Study of Consciousness. The rumor is that they started this because they didn't want to put up with what's his name's nonsense about quantum theory in the brain. Somebody tell me the name because I'm dyslexic, I know quite well. Does all the work on quantum and organizes the Tucson conferences. And the other society started at that time as well. I've never been to one of their meetings, but I've been, of course, to a lot of Tucson meetings. Okay. So I want to talk about teaching a little bit. So what I've tried to do is establish that it's broadly a topic of interest. You don't have to worry about losing your job anymore if you're in academia and you want to teach a course on consciousness, although we're only a few years away from that. I'm very influenced by John Dewey, and John Dewey was very influential on, my brain's not working here, Carl Rogers. So actually I was trained in Rogerian, client-centered therapy, did some Rogerian group work back in the day when I was a master's degree student at the University of Florida. It was all about Carl Rogers back in the 60s. But Rogers was deeply influenced by John Dewey. And, you know, as you probably know, Dewey was all about teaching by doing or learning by doing. So if we teach today as we taught yesterday, we rob our children of tomorrow. Well, that's a nice one from Dewey. There are a lot of them, but he was really about learning by doing and learning by being involved. So I should say doing can be dialogue, it can be conversation, it can be working on problems together. But this is an interesting thought, I think. Education is not an affair of telling and being told, but an active and constructive process. And this is very important for me. In so much as I can do it in any class I have, I don't like the old process of just stuffing information down people's throats. You know, there's the old saying that you forget 90% of what you learn in college, so you should make the 10% as big as you can. And I still have colleagues that sort of teach this way. Just learn as much as you can. I hope you don't forget all of it. But that's information transfer. My own philosophy of teaching, and what's gotten me at least a couple of awards and some pretty high evaluations from students, is find out and give them room to explore what they're interested in and provide the resources. So this is from John Dewey, but it could just as well have been from Carl Rogers. As a matter of fact, there's something you're interested in, do what you can, read about it, get involved, share your thoughts with others. So this is dialogical, not memorizing, but dialogical. So there's a process of sharing and discussing. A typical class that I run, and for example, the first one I ran that got me an award was my first course on consciousness, and it was in a liberal studies master's program. So the students were fairly mature. In fact, a lot of them had law degrees and other sorts of things. They were very well educated, but they wanted an academic experience. We'd get together once a week in the basement of the library and just talk, share ideas. Now, I would put some readings out, and that's what Carl Rogers would do too. We would have topics like, say, consciousness in the brain, or consciousness and unusual phenomenon, consciousness in it, whatever it was. I'd put something out for them to read. But then when we got together, it was all spontaneous. I also ran a master's program for about 10 years at the Graduate Institute in Connecticut. We'd get together 3 times in the fall, 3 times in the spring. And that's what we'd do. We'd all sit down at the table, have cups of coffee, and just talk. And I was really amazed at how people would pick up where they left off. I mean, here we are having a whole discussion about the nature of consciousness, or what intelligence really is, or cognitive process, whatever it was. We might have that in September, and then we get back together in December, and people would start as if there had never been a break. When people get involved in this process, if you have a small group, now the size of the group depends. My experience, partly from social psychology, is 5 to 12. It's a good number. If you get above that, you have people on the inside and outliers, people that just sit and do nothing. But somewhere around 5 to 10, everybody gets involved, and it's a running discussion. And what Carl Rogers did when he started teaching, he was a little more extreme than me. Everybody would come in the room and sit down, including him, and he would just sit. And he would just sit there. The class would be over in an hour, and he'd say, "What the hell's going on here?" And he said, "Well, good to see you." And they'd come back 2 days later, and he'd just sit again. Finally, somebody would say, "Well, what the hell? I paid tuition for this damn class on counseling, and I haven't heard a thing from you. Well, Carl said, "Well, I got a couple of books you might want to read and think about a little bit." And he would start pulling out a few resources, and people would read them, and then would come back and say, "Well, I read this book." And, within a month, his classes were popping and running, popping like popcorn, running. People were writing, racing around to the library. The thing is, if people are interested in something, they'll learn about it. So that's the John Dewey part. He considered traditional education methods to be kind of a prison. You really stuff all this stuff down your throat, and you're supposed to remember it later. And I actually have had 1 or 2 people teach my consciousness courses while I was away. That seemed to me to be what they were doing. I always felt there were 2 different philosophies about education. One of them is, how much can you learn? That's the traditional school. There's a lot of German philosophy in that. Straighten them out, forcing information down, get them to sit up straight in class, and they'll make good factory workers. And that was sort of the product that the Germans wanted, and they did pretty well at it. People could make tanks or submarines or anything else coming from that background. The other philosophy for me, well, you're obviously seeing very humanistic. Carl Rogers is the humanist. And back in the day, it was he and Maslow were the 2 main humanistic psychologists. And Maslow didn't write that much about teaching. He was really interested in self-actualization. Although I should say that Rogers was also about self-actualization. And his idea was that teaching allows people to self-actualize in the directions that they want. that they're called to develop in. So self-actualization was a big part of humanistic psychology back in the 70s, and I think today is deeply influential on current psychotherapy and counseling. It's just not recognized by name as much. But it's been a long time since you went to the therapist and he asked you to lay on the couch looking the other way and talk. The old psychoanalytic method. So organizing, and the goal for me and all of my courses, whether they're on consciousness or not, is how can people develop a love for the topic so that they'll carry it with them. I remember as an undergraduate, I took a course in art appreciation by a graduate student that was so far above us, all she could do was talk down to the class. And, you know, we really disgusted her. We were so ignorant. And she made it really clear that we did. And we'd get these tests, and she would give us like 200 archaeological sites and paintings and so on. And we're supposed to have memorized them all. I managed to get through that course with a D or a C. I can't remember which. It wasn't very encouraging, but I loved the topic. And as years went by, I learned more and more. And then I married a spouse who loves art. And now, some of you know, I regularly teach a course in the history of art and consciousness. I just love the topic. So the bottom line for good teaching is teach what you love and love what you teach. And that's just about it. If it's a topic that if you can teach the courses in the area you love, and you can express that and communicate it to the students in this sort of open, non-hierarchical, non-dictatorial way, people will enjoy it and they'll get involved. So that's why I don't have a lot more to say, because that's kind of the whole story for me. My classes have always been forums for people to explore the topic we're kind of working on. When I taught at the Graduate Institute in Connecticut years ago, we actually had a kind of internship. I think it was a wonderful thing. We don't have it anymore. The organization there is still there, but it's run by different people. It's a whole different deal. But in the master's program, if you were in the master's program, you had to go out and do an internship. And this would be anything you wanted to do, but you'd have to go find a professional, glass blower. One guy liked to work with horses, shodding horses. What do you call it? A blacksmith. He worked with a blacksmith for a while. Another one went to a monastery and talked to the folks there and said, what can I do? He spent a month there sweeping the floors, praying with the priest and so on. And I'll tell you, it was really amazing. I would say that 20 to 30% of my students, our students, are still doing that stuff professionally. You know, it was something they always wanted to hang out with, never thought they could do. Went and volunteered themselves for a month to do anything in that environment. And by the time the month was over, they said, well, why am I going away? This is what I like to do. I had one student that had her father had been disabled in the hospital. So she, as a little girl, would go dance for him. And he liked that. She would go in the hospital, and then she would dance for other people in the hospital. There's a long story from there, but by the time she finished our master's program, she was directing a center for retired old people who had no money in Connecticut. So, you know, these things can really change your life if you get involved with them. Well, let's see. I'm just about at the end. So this is, you've seen this before. This is John Dewey's original model, but it really describes what we've been talking about as well, especially, excuse me, getting a little too happy with this. Oh, this book, I just want to mention that we all read it in the 70s, 60s on becoming a person. It's one of those books that by the time you're done with it, you not only have fallen in love with it and can't put it down and are giving it to all your friends, but you're a different person. What more can I say? It'll change you. It's a powerful book on accepting yourself, learning to love yourself, loving others, and living life lightly, well, whatever. Living life lightly. So that's it for me. We've got 2 minutes left. I don't know whether there's anything else I should say or not, but I hope you enjoyed it, and that's sort of my ramble. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
We've got time for one 20-second question, I guess.
We do.
Or
someone
comment.
Like to ask a question or comment, sure.
Well, thank you all very much. And your assignment is to read the book on becoming a person. I don't care if it's 30 years old.
Wait a minute. You have Luke wanting to ask a question.
Yeah, I just have a quick question. I've heard of like Peter Gray's work, and it's all self-directed learning. And as a parent, trying to figure out how to teach my kids and stuff. I was curious if you're familiar with his work, and I also too just want to just a general comment.
No,
Thank you so
I'm not
much.
familiar with his work, but I'm sure it comes from the same roots in humanistic psychology.
Yeah, they did like
so many different ways, and unless I'm mistaken, you should do it.
I love it. And it's fun for me personally to kind of see one of Jeffrey's mentors, and it's been just fun to essentially hang out with you for a time. I really appreciate your talk.
Well, my pleasure. Look me up again. Come to Italy, we'll have wine. Anything else? Jeffrey, thank you. I want to thank again publicly Jeffrey and Thomas, especially Jeffrey especially Jeffrey and Thomas for putting this whole affair together. I've organized conferences myself, as you know, and it's believe it or not, it's a hell of a lot of work, and it's a hell of a lot of time. So thank you so much, both of you.
Thank you. Carol's got her hand up, but I don't think we quite have time. If it's really quick, Carol, it has to be like a 10-second question. And we can't hear you.
I just want to say thank you so much. That I also came from the era of humanistic psychology. On becoming a person was what enlivened my whole life, the rest of my life.
Oh, yes. You can't read that book and come out the same person. It's wonderful.
And thanks to everybody. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Carol. All right. Thank you, Allan or Leslie, depending upon the era someone knows you from.
Right.
Do you have a preference these days? Are you going by Allan again? Or
I go by Leslie professionally, but my family calls me Allan, and anyone that calls me Allan, I consider a friend.
Okay. Thank you, Allan.
Anything in print's going to be Allan, because I changed my name to Leslie after a big workshop with Donnie Epstein.
I remember that.
And, yeah,
I remember that. Okay.
We could talk more, but I'm out of time.